So welcome everyone. This is our monthly intuitive gathering where we are diving into that part of ourselves, which is highly intuitive. We're going to talk today specifically about what percentage of people in the world, approximately speaking, are more intuitive, how people who are maybe less intuitive and use that less as a dominant feature, how they navigate the world and trying to bridge that understanding. And then also, what is the relationship between empathy, being an empath, and our intuition, and how do they work together? So we're going to just kind of dive in here and get started. And then at the end of this, as we usually do with all of our sessions, we will turn off the recording and then have confidential sharing. So one of the things I wanted to dive into a couple of years ago, because I have always been highly intuitive. I am an INFJ in the Myers-Briggs system. And the dominant trait for INFJs is intuition. And so I really took a deep dive a few years ago to learn about this part of myself and to really start to embrace why I perceive the world as I do, how my brain works. It's a work in progress to figure that one out. And part of that research took me to the Myers-Briggs Foundation. And by the way, I will have the notes for this with this video, so you don't feel like you have to write all this down unless that's how you learn, and that really helps you. But according to the Myers-Briggs Foundation, they've literally given hundreds of thousands of personality tests from a period of 1987 through 2002. They were tracking these 4 components of personality. And what they found was about 26% of all the people who took their test scored higher on the intuitive side of the scale. So I call us the 26 percenters, right? The 26 percenters. And of course, that means that highly intuitive people are a minority temperament, just as HSPs are a minority temperament, just as empaths are. But what does this really mean? And what really caught my curiosity about this is that the other aspects of personality that Myers-Briggs measures, like introversion and extroversion, thinkers and feelers, judgers and perceivers, they're about 50-50. And so I wondered, why is the scale tipped so highly on the sensor side? So one of the measurements they have is, are you more intuitive or are you more of a sensor, right? Why are some of us more intuitive? What would be, in psychological terms and evolutionary terms, the advantage to some people being more intuitive? And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But what I think is really important, if you are part of the 26%, is to understand why the 74%, how they navigate the world. Because we live in a world where, we are a minority temperament. And so sensors tend to pay more attention to immediate data, and they get this from their 5 senses, their taste, their sight, their sound, their, touch, all these things, and from the direct experiences that they're having. And they tend to create meaning in their world. They think about things from conscious thought, right? As opposed to subconscious. So they sort of limit their attention to facts and data. And they tend to be more detail oriented. Now, I'm going to say that, but I'll also say that people who are both intuitive and HSP, because HSPs notice all the subtleties, can be both a broad picture thinker and a person who can dive in. So I don't mean to make any of this sound like this is exactly how every person who's a sensor is, or this is exactly how every intuitive. We're all unique individuals. We all are complex. We have many different aspects to our personality and our life experiences. But fundamentally speaking, mostly sensors focus on what is immediately in front of them, what is practical, and they tend to live life more as it is rather than trying to change things or change the world. So you find that they like logic, and they tend to pursue things in a clear sequence. That doesn't mean that an intuitive person doesn't like logic or can't do things sequentially, but most intuitive people tend to to err on the side of more holistic thinking, more interconnected thinking, rather than it's this and then it's this and then it's this. There is no better or worse way of being. We're all just wired differently, right? And so sensors sometimes could be seen as short-sighted by intuitives. Like, how can you not see this big picture? Why are you just focused on this thing right here? There's all these other things to look at. On the other hand, intuitives tend to process data more deeply than sensors. And, you know, we learn over time how to trust our subconscious, whether that's through dreams, that's through getting a gut feeling in your body, just having a knowing of something. Over time, we start to realize there's ways that we perceive the world, the ways that we take in the data, which is very, very different. And we're good at spotting patterns. We're good at like elevating and kind of taking a high level view, as opposed to always digging into the details. Doesn't mean we can't. And it doesn't mean that a sensor can't look at the big picture either. But there is a tendency, you know, there's a strength, and then there's a part where we're less developed, if you will. Intuitives like ideas, inspiration, philosophy. We tend to focus on the future. We make plans about things we'd like to change, rather than continuing to live kind of in the imperfect present. And we might be seen as impractical or theoretical by sensors. It's like, oh, all you do is want to sit around and talk about theory and talk about all these ideas, but you're never getting anything done. So again, I'm not trying to create just a broad brush, but these are some of the aspects where there can be misunderstandings between people who process information differently. And I suggest that being intuitive, so we asked, why are 26% of all humans intuitive, more intuitive? And I think that anything that is that large, and this is what Dr. Elaine Aron and other research psychologists will say, any percentage of people that's that large is not a mistake. It is an evolutionary advantage. So, you know, there's an evolutionary advantage for some people in the tribe, in the community, to be very focused on what's happening right now. As a matter of fact, as a highly intuitive person, sometimes I have to remind myself to be present when I'm driving, to like watch what's happening instead of kind of being off in my head and thinking about all these ideas. And so there is an evolutionary advantage, and we complement each other, right? But there's an evolutionary advantage for people being intuitive as well. We need people who are visionaries. We need people who can connect the dots and put all these ideas together, and perhaps be able to synthesize all the different aspects of people's perspectives in the community and gather them in some place of unity. Like, we need people who can do that. And what happens in my intuitive brain, and I'll be really curious to see when we open up to our conversation part of this, how that works for people who are on this call. What I do is I gather all the data that's happening, everything I'm noticing, whether that's colors, patterns, textures, words, phrases, song lyrics, movies, messages, books I've read, and I catalog it all. And I've been doing that for 48 years. So everything I've ever experienced goes in. And all of that stuff is in what I call the library, right? I have this huge library, all these stacks and stacks of books. And sometimes I can access those things right away. I can pull from stack, H and stack N and pull these two ideas together and go, wow, look at the synergy between those two things. Sometimes it's difficult for me, and I have to send my librarian back there to take a look for something. I go look for that. I know there's this thing I'm trying to figure out, and I can't get it in my mind at the forefront right now. And intuitives' minds are busy, creating pathways and intersections between what to others might seem like very different thoughts, ideas, visuals, and then all of a sudden, boom, it comes together and a pattern emerges. We see the intersections. There's like nodal points, and then there's intersecting lines between them, and we're like, this relates to this, relates to this, relates to this. And some people wouldn't be able to see those things, but we have the ability to do that. some people also believe that intuition comes from a larger consciousness, a larger field of consciousness, whether that's an actual entity that is conscious, whether that is a collective energy that's conscious. We believe that, I've called them divine downloads, and a lot of other people do that as well. Sometimes I'll just get something and I'm like, where did that come from? And some of it isn't even something that I have a conscious awareness of knowing, but then I know it. I can hear it, I can write it, I can do these things. So this is part of my belief, and I always say, you get to choose what works for you. But I believe that all of those pathways are not just stored in my individual neural network in my brain, but in a larger field that's available to everyone. And Carl Jung termed it the collective unconscious, right? The 80% of our group iceberg that's floating below sea level, right? We can see this 20% on top, but there's all this other stuff. And intuitive people, if we continue to open ourselves and we continue to train ourselves to use this gift, we can tap into powerful archetypes, powerful information. We can sort of pull things down. In quantum physics, they say there's really two states. There is the waveform, right, which is kind of that web of consciousness, and it's like pure potential. And then there's the particle form, that as soon as we begin to tap into it and pay attention to it, we bring it down into something tangible. And so I think intuitive people can much more easily access that wave. We can much more easily access all the potential that's there and create something new, or have an inspiration or have an insight about it. And what's really exciting to me is that right now I'm watching the 26 percenters rapidly awakening to this added dimension of our wisdom. We've always been receiving information and putting the pieces together, but we may have just missed an intuitive message as a coincidence, or we may have questioned its validity, especially since some of these things come in more like metaphors. They come in symbolically, right? It's not always just cut and dry. It's not always like, here's what it is. We have to dive deeper, and we have to really go, well, what does that mean? If I see an animal cross my path, and yesterday I was cleaning out my home office, and I found a pack of bird seed that I had bought specifically for woodpeckers. I don't know why I did that. It was a number of months ago. I've slept since then. But then I was sitting out on my porch a little bit later that afternoon, and I'm just there and I'm listening to the birds, and all of a sudden I hear this woodpecker, and I'm like, okay, that's really interesting. So then I go on, onto my cell phone, and I'm looking up what is a woodpecker as a spirit animal. This is the way we sort of navigate. We're like, wow, look at all the things that are coming up. And as we begin to become more aware, as we pay attention to these messages, I feel in my own experience, it just keeps getting richer and richer. There's so much information there. There's so much of my life when I felt like I just wasn't even paying attention or watching that, or I would dismiss it as just, oh, it's coincidence. But now I kind of feel differently about that. And part of it is because these messages can arrive in strange forms, like what I just discussed, or it can be a vision, or you can hear something in your mind, or you can have a dream, or you smell, a smell from a person who's passed on, or, you have these different things. And so it's easy for us when we live in a world where the majority of people look at only what is in front of them, right? When just what's tangible, and this is how their brain operates, and this is how they process information. And then you're intuitive and you're receiving all these things which are kind of unusual and outside of the norm. It can be challenging to believe yourself, to believe that this is really happening, and to explain it to people who may not process information the same way as you do. So I wanted to explore for a moment the relationship between being an empath and being intuitive, because it's often that those two things are kind of simultaneous. Most empaths are also highly intuitive. And this is just my definition, but I define an empath as a person with the ability to sense subtle and not so subtle shifts in energy, right? So when something changes, our radar kind of perks up and sends us an alert. And it could be a shift in mental energy, emotional energy, physical, environmental, collective, or spiritual energy. It's kind of like if you dropped a stone into a still pond, the ripple goes out and we feel that ripple, whether that ripple is really small or really big, we feel it, right? And sometimes we know exactly what that shift means, but often we just receive like kind of a general feeling like something changed. I'll see this online all the time. I obviously subscribe to a lot of empath groups, and someone's like, do you feel the collective energy changing? And people are like, yeah, something shifted and I feel something coming. And so we might not know exactly what that is. It might be happening right now, or it could be that we're sensing energy in advance, something that's going to happen in the future, because energetic vibration is not really limited by time or space. And empaths tend to be more attuned to shifts in energy with those that we know most intimately and who we love. And we become familiar with their vibrational frequency. So when something's off, when something changes, like we can tell right away. But we can respond just as strongly to strangers, to changes in collective energy, and even large like astrological cycles. So that's a little bit of empathy, and that's like a whole workshop in of itself. But if we come into intuition, as we talked about, this is like the filing of every experience and then the drawing together of these different patterns and these interconnections. So the way I relate the two of them together is, first we sense it, which is being an empath. Then we make sense of it, which is being intuitive, right? So we feel this shift, and then our brain goes, okay, now what I'm going to do is take everything I've ever experienced and sense into, what does this mean? We create meaning from it. So intuition is how we create meaning. And people who are sensors create meaning from their day-to-day physical sensory experience. And intuitives create meaning from all of the things we've ever experienced and the thing that's happening right now. So, when the empathic part of yourself senses a shift in energy and you have no idea what it means, what I remind myself to do is just to relax, just to relax. Because I think what happens often, now, not if it's like something that's dangerous, I don't mean it that way, but if it's like, wow, I sense something's different, but I don't know what it is. And we can go into the cycle where we're just constantly trying to figure it out. What I've found is that when I can invite myself to relax, when I can invite my nervous system to kind of stand down and not be on red alert all the time, I actually can then open my intuition and I can ask, well, what is that about? I want to be shown what this is about. And then I wait and I watch and I observe and I pay attention and I open myself to receive those informations. So this is kind of the intersection of empathy and intuition, right? Intuition is the part of ourselves which makes sense of patterns, which looks at the big picture, which has not only the present in mind, but all the things that could possibly happen in the future. Intuitives are really great at projecting and even, what I want to say, maybe prophesizing, maybe that would be a good word. Here's what I think could happen. And sometimes when we do that, we're right. And sometimes when we do that, we're not. I mean, the thing that we have to remember is that everything is filtered through our humanness. So if as a human being, I have had a lot of situations that were either traumatic or created fear or whatever that is, I could be filtering that message through those old patterns, through those old triggers. I could also be filtering that information through my belief systems. I could also be filtering that information through the joyous parts of life, right? So there's lots of ways that we interpret. And let's kind of finish here with the relationship between the intuition and the intellect, right? Because we have this sort of multiple parts of our brain, right? We have our instinctual brain, which tries to keep us safe, tries to keep us alive, needs to get its basic needs met. And we have our intellectual brain, which gathers all this information and tries to make sense out of it, right? Tries to understand. And then we have our intuitive brain, which is sort of able to tap into this larger field and create patterns in that information. And so how are we using these parts of ourselves in conjunction with each other? Which parts do you feel are most developed in you, and which parts would you like to actually develop more? And we can do that, and we can practice. And that's what we're going to do next, because in every one of these workshops, I just sense into like some kind of tool or practice that we can use, very easy things that anyone can do to immediately start to strengthen that intuitive muscle, right? So in just a moment, I'm going to ask you to go ahead, if you're on this call, to turn your video off so that you can just be in your own space. And to get settled in to the chair that you're in, and just maybe allowing that breath to come in and out of your body in a more natural way. So we're just like settling in. We've been kind of up in our intuitive mind. We've been analyzing what is intuition, what is empathy, and now we're really dropping in, and we're going to actually utilize our intuitive gifts. And we want to be in touch with our body. And we want to be in touch with our body. We want to be present here in this moment. Ironically, a part of being highly intuitive is actually being in the physical, being in that sensing. They're like two sides to the same coin, right? We need to strengthen both of those sides. So we're feeling our feet on the floor. We're noticing the pace of the breath that's coming in and out of our body. We're noticing any tension that you might feel in your muscles. Like right now, I can feel my heartbeat. Maybe you can feel your heartbeat. So when we get really present, it's actually easier for us to open ourselves. You can even close your eyes. Sometimes that's really helpful for me to kind of release the sensory and just be in this space, tuning in within. Some people feel that their intuition comes from their heart. That may be a place where you want to focus your attention right now. Some people feel that the intuition comes from their gut, their belly, if that may be helpful to you. Some people feel that it comes from their third eye or their crown. Wherever that is within your physical vessel, you can just tune into that space, wherever you tend to receive the most information. And now I invite you to open your eyes, and I'd like you to just allow your eyes to scan the room until they come upon a particular object in the space that you feel really drawn to. Don't need to know why. Just look around the space that you're in and focus on something that you feel very, very drawn to. I'd like you to just take a few moments to really look deeply at that object. Notice all of the details. And allow whatever thoughts to come into your mind. Might be memories of how you acquired it, what it means to you, whatever's coming to you. We're just going to be quiet for a minute while you look at this object and allow messages to come in. And now allow your eyes to drift around the room again. and just pick up the next object that feels really important. And you're going to do the same thing. You're going to look at all the details and just open yourself to receive whatever message that object wants to send to you. And one more time, allow your eyes to roam around until you come upon a third object that feels really important. And just tune in completely. Allow yourself to receive. And now I invite you to ask your intuitive mind, what is the link and the interconnectedness between all three of these objects? Just take a moment. You can even close your eyes if you want to, just tuning into the energy of all three of them. Why did this come up for you? What is the deeper meaning underneath why you felt drawn to these specific objects today? How do they relate to what's been recently happening in your life? And what messages are they sending you? Now I invite you to take a few moments, if you like, to write or draw or record what you received. Sometimes it's nice to be able to put it on a piece of paper and see it right there so that you can remember and perhaps even dive deeper into this after our time together.